In a culture that's confused about gender, what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, I think it's vitally important for us to talk about what does it mean to be a man? What is biblical manhood? Hey everybody, Daniel here. Welcome back to the channel. We're doing a tough question. Today we're talking about the question of what does it mean to be a man? You might be asking, why are we doing with that question? Because I think it's absolutely vital. We live in a culture that's confused. We have people that don't know where to look, and we don't know how to define what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And so we need to deal with this question. What is a man and why does it matter? In his book, Act Like Man, Joe B. Martin stated this: manhood is bestowed, is passed down from man to boy. That caused me to think, what are we passing down? In our culture, where we live, what are we defining and teaching and passing down as manhood? Now, there's two things I want to point out that I think often misdirect or confuse us when we begin to talk about manhood. First is, people often define manhood by externals, meaning how strong someone is, how many guns someone has, how much money someone has. Now, someone might like these things, but these don't define what the core of a man is. Because you could have these things one day and lose them the next. There has to be something deeper. What is manhood? What's the core of manhood? It can't be defined by the externals. The second thing in our culture is that our culture has lost its rite of passage. What I mean by that is in many cultures, there's a rite of passage where a boy becomes a man. In the West, largely this does not exist. Why this matters is because you have boys growing up. They're seeking what it means to be a man. They look to culture who can't define gender. They look around and there's just this confusion of what it is. They like, is it external? Is it this? There's no rite of passage. There's no foundation. They don't know where to begin. And so we have boys that know how to shave. They eventually can shave, but they aren't yet men. So naturally the question is, where do we begin? What does it mean to be a man? What should we pass down? As I noted earlier by Joe B. Martin, that manhood is bestowed, but then we have to ask, then who bestows it? Who defines it? Who's the one who gives it? The book of Genesis answers that question. When God created man, it says God created man and then breathed life into him. God created man, God bestowed manhood, God defines manhood. This is the starting point. You cannot understand manhood or what it means to be a man apart from the God who created man. God intentionally created man with a purpose. So what is God's design and purpose for man? After God created man, in Genesis 2:15, it states this: the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. In this video, I just want to simply point out three truths from the book of Genesis about biblical manhood. First, men are created to work. Now let me define what I mean by that. When God created Adam, he then called Adam to join him in nurturing and caring for his creation. Adam wasn't called to be passive and simply let life happen. He was to work, to cultivate, and to bring life. Now for you, that doesn't necessarily mean you're doing what Adam did, as in working in a garden, but it does mean we're called to cultivate life wherever God has placed us. The Hebrew for work carries this idea of to cultivate and to serve. So when God called Adam and created him, Adam was to serve God, and in that serve those and what is around him. And so when God entrusted him with these things, he is then asking, how can I cause these things around me, what God has given me, to flourish? This is the first step of biblical manhood. We're created to serve. We're created to cultivate life in others and those around us. It isn't about how much money one can bring, how much money one can make, but it's how much life one could give and how one could cause things and people to flourish around them. Second is men are created to keep, as it says in Genesis 2:15. The word keep here in the Hebrew carries the understanding to guard, to protect, to watch over. Adam is soon be called to protect or watch over Eve. He wasn't just called to be a gardener, but also a guardian. Biblical idea of protection isn't just about being the strongest person in the room, but about taking responsibility with what's been entrusted to you. Biblical men are to protect those God's entrusted them with. When someone's headed in the wrong direction, they're to step in. When someone's leading others away, they're to step in. We're called to guard, protect, to watch over. Now, that we'll get more into details of that, to what it means to be watchful in another video, but just want to set the scene, the foundation, understanding that whatever God has entrusted the man with, they're called to protect, they're called to guard, to watch over it. Thirdly, men are created to lead. Now, when I say that, people are like, oh, isn't that toxic masculinity? No, biblical leadership is not dictatorship. It's not harshness. It's not authoritarianism. We'll unpack that more as weeks go on. But what we look to, when we talk about leadership, what it means to lead, we look to Jesus. Jesus is the model. He was a servant leader. He loved people deeply. He spoke truth. He lived truth. He sacrificed himself for others. That's what it means to lead. So biblical men are not called to sit on the sideline and let just life pass them by. They're called to step up into responsibility God has given them, and to lead and love like Jesus, to serve like Jesus, to protect others like Jesus, to walk like Jesus. They're called to lead, not be passive. So then we have to ask, how are we to become that man? Well, the book of Genesis immediately answers this question. God tells Adam this: you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. You might say, Daniel, what does that verse have anything to do with manhood? I would say everything, because a man cannot become a man until he first submits to the God who created him. God created Adam to not just hear his words, but to obey it. Man cannot lead well unless someone is leading them. So we must first allow God to lead us before we can lead others. True biblical manhood doesn't begin with the car you drive, the amount of money you make, or the hobby you have. It begins with one question: who will you submit to, or who will you allow to lead your lives? When we submit to Jesus, we can finally become the man he created us to be. We will be able to serve others around us. We'll be able to protect those around us, and we will be able to lead the way Jesus calls us to lead. We will become what I will say is provider and protector. So the big idea in this video is simply this, and we're just setting the foundation. We're going to deal with stuff in the later videos. The big idea is manhood is bestowed by God. God intentionally created man. God defines manhood. And he calls man to work, which means to serve, to cultivate, to bring life. He calls man to protect, meaning to watch over, to care for those God has entrusted to them. He calls those to lead, men to lead like Jesus, willing to lay their life down for those that God's entrusted with them. But it all begins again with this question: will they submit? Isn't allowing God to lead them. So let me leave you with a few challenges today. First is, will you submit to God and his will for your life? Will you submit to God and his will for your life? Second is, will you seek to care for, work, and nurture or bring life to whoever and whatever God has placed around you? Will you seek to keep, guard, protect those whom are entrusted to your care? And will you step up and lead in the way God has designed you to lead, like Jesus is a servant leader? Today was simply setting the stage. In the coming weeks, we're going to look more details in biblical manhood, the challenges men face, the pitfalls we go into. But today is simply this: man is not defined by culture. Man is defined by his Creator. Biblical manhood begins with submitting to the God who created man, and then is lived out by serving, protecting, and leading like Jesus. We're going to get more into details of this in the coming videos, but I hope that helps and challenges us as we begin to dig into this big topic of what it means to be a man. What is biblical manhood? Hope that helps. I'll see you guys next time.